Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a remarkable set of sources. We're talking memoirs, private notes, and decades of personal observation to take you behind the velvet curtain of the golden age of comedy.
We really are. We're going to try and strip away that glamorous image of these legends, the shiny tuxedos and the perfect timing,
Oh, yeah.
to find the raw, obsessive work ethic and, frankly, the sometimes chaotic private lives of the people who made us laugh.
And our deep dive today is centered largely through the eyes of someone who grew up right inside that machine. Marlo Thomas, who is, of course, the daughter of the great Danny Thomas.
Yeah, she gives us this unprecedented look at the true cost and the immense pressure of being a professional comic, when your entire identity, your whole sense of self, hinges on whether or not you can make a room full of strangers laugh.
So our mission here is to really get into the psychology of it all. What drives someone to pursue laughter with what they considered, and this is key, life and death intensity?
It's that intensity. And when you dive into the source material, the language these professionals use to describe success, it's shocking.
It really is. It's so aggressive, almost violently charged, even though the profession itself is dedicated entirely to generating, well, joy. Okay, let's unpack this. This high-stakes world of laughter.
It's the ultimate duality, isn't it? You're there to create joy, but your success is measured in terms of destruction. Marlo Thomas recounts this very specific dialogue after her father's opening nights at these huge venues, the Sands in Las Vegas or the Copacabana in New York.
Right, the big rooms.
The biggest. She'd ask him, "Did you kill him, Daddy?" And the standard reply, the sign that he had absolutely triumphed, would be, "I murdered him, honey. I left him for dead."
I murdered him. I mean, that sounds like a line from a gritty gangster movie, not a family checking in after a set of jokes.
Exactly. But it perfectly captures that feeling of high-stakes gladiatorial combat. It's a profound observation that the lexicon for success in a profession that's, quote, filled with laughter is rooted in violence.
So for these elite performers, the big headliners, getting those laughs wasn't just a job.
Oh, not at all. It wasn't merely a job or an artistic pursuit. It was, and this is not an exaggeration, the entire foundation of their lives, their identity, their financial security, their entire sense of worth. It all hinged on whether they could consistently murder the audience night after night. You weren't good until you were lethal.
Wow. And the work ethic required to achieve that kind of, I guess, comedic destruction, that was something his family lived with constantly.
All the time.
We see this so vividly in the image of Danny Thomas's perpetual workshop.
Yes, the sound of his audio tape being rewound, it was this constant, almost mechanical hum in the house, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the wee hours of the morning.
And Marlo Thomas said it sounded like a Swedish movie?
Like a Swedish movie, yeah, because the voices were all scrambled running backward. And you have to understand, this wasn't passive reflection. This wasn't him just enjoying the sound of applause. This was the absolute meticulous engineering of an emotional response.
He wasn't just basking in the glow. He was performing a deep post-mortem, dissecting the crowd's response with, surgical precision.
That's the perfect word for it, surgical. This is where you get the core insight. That for him, comedy was fundamentally engineering. He would be listening for the weak spots.
Not the high points, the low point.
Exactly. He wasn't satisfied just knowing where the laughs were big. He focused on the moment right after the big laugh. He might listen and say, "That's a big laugh, but the one after it is weak. See, they're tired. They need a rest."
They're tired. So the goal isn't just delivering the punchline. It's managing the audience's physical and emotional fatigue.
Precisely. If he identified a dip in energy, a quiet spot, he knew he couldn't hit them with another joke immediately. It would just die, it wouldn't land.
So what would he do?
He would strategically insert a piece of physical comedy or a song, like he had this famous whoopee routine, to basically reset the room. It was a rhythmic calculation, a pacing mechanism designed to allow the audience to catch their breath and refill their emotional reservoir before he hit them with the next strong routine.
That is just an incredible level of detail.
This meticulous attention to audience physiology in the dead of night, it just shows the level of obsession. And it was driven really by his working class immigrant background. Failure simply wasn't an option for him.
And while the father was obsessed with this brutal, almost analytical pursuit of the laugh, the family life itself was, well, it sounds like it was built on this boisterous, almost frantic foundation of constant celebration.
Oh, absolutely. It was an environment where performance was the norm, not the exception.
Yeah.
They celebrated absolutely everything, and this joy was often anchored by the maternal side of the family.
Right, the Italian side.
Yes, we get this incredible portrait of the Italian maternal grandmother, Marlo's mother's mother, who was this dark-haired, dark-eyed powerhouse. Her idol was Sophie Tucker, and she sang that same kind of brassy, husky, raucous voice.
But her showmanship went beyond just singing, right? She embodies that pure, unadulterated passion for performance that seemed to run through the entire family DNA.
She did. She played the drums. In her 70s, she was still performing as the drummer for her little band, Marie's Merry Music Makers, often in a Pasadena beer garden.
In her 70s, that's amazing.
She was pure, energetic, unapologetic show business. And this is where it gets really interesting. She was also a genius in entrepreneurial showmanship, which connects directly to her son-in-law's own drive.
How so? How did her entrepreneurial spirit manifest?
Through clever marketing. It was brilliant. She understood her audience demographics completely. During the week, when she wanted the older, more traditional crowd who knew who Danny Thomas was, she'd bill herself as Danny Thomas's mother-in-law. That was her hook.
Yeah.
But then on the weekends, when she wanted a younger, hipper crowd to come in, she'd literally flip her sign and bill herself as Marlo Thomas's grandmother.
No way. That's fantastic.
Isn't it? It's a perfect encapsulation of the family culture. Know your audience, adapt your brand, and infuse showmanship into every single aspect of life, even in a local beer garden. It just shows that the need to perform and, generate income was a deeply inherited trait.
The intensity required to murder a crowd nightly must have left Danny Thomas just perpetually keyed up.
Yeah.
I mean, that intensity couldn't have contained only to the stage.
Yeah.
Did that obsession spill over? Forcing his family to develop their own defenses against that level of dramatic performance. Let's transition now to how laughter became a necessary defense mechanism, a psychological survival kit inside the Thomas house.
That's an excellent way to frame it. Humor was the primary currency in that house, but because performance was constant, the line between genuine emotion and, let's say, theatrical enforcement was often really blurred. And we see this most powerfully in the infamous Father's Day card incident involving Marlo's sister, Tare.
The setup sounds so genuinely sweet. Tare gives her father a beautifully written Hallmark card, full of this deeply loving prose about him being the best father in the world, caring, sacrificing, everything a daughter should feel.
It was a genuinely moving moment. But Danny Thomas, who was the ultimate performer and controller of the room, used this vulnerability not for a shared emotional moment, but for parental enforcement.
What do you mean?
He looks up from the card, and there are still tears in his eyes, and he asks Tara if she truly believes what she has written. When she says yes, of course, he hits her with this devastating punchline, completely flipping the script. Because if you really believe what's written in this card, you'd do the things Daddy wants you to do, wouldn't you?
Oh, that is psychological judo. He weaponized sincere emotion to enforce compliance. He just used that deep, loving sentiment as leverage.
And he used it immediately. The target of his anger was her missing retainer. His voice rose, dramatically, as he shouted about having spent his hard-earned money to ensure she had beautiful, straight teeth, only for her to neglect the appliance, leaving it upstairs in a drawer.
And the room just goes silent, I imagine.
Dead silent.
Yeah.
It was a moment of true, terrifying tension and strictness.
And the only way out of that terrifying silence was through comedy.
Absolutely. Tara, completely cornered, turns to Marlo and delivers the perfect, immediate retort, a line of just genius comedic timing. You couldn't have given me the other card.
That is brilliant.
And that was it. The entire dramatic tension just dissolved. Danny Thomas instantly understood the brilliance of the joke and fell over laughing. This little anecdote shows you the entire Thomas family dynamic in miniature. The immediate pivot from fear and strictness back to catharsis, using a perfectly timed joke as the release valve.
That need for laughter as a survival tool, it seems like it was learned early, especially when you contrast the boisterous home life with the strict expectations of the older generations, like the Lebanese grandfather.
Oh, the clash of cultures was significant. Danny Thomas's father, who would visit from Toledo, was a very traditional Lebanese Catholic patriarch. He was of the mind that kids should be seen and not heard. Marlo Thomas described him as kind of mean, and she recalled the sting of a pussy willow branch for simply playing with a dog in his beloved tomato garden.
Wow, so he was a severe contrast to the commotion of the Thomas dinner table.
A complete contrast. So when the father, Danny, perhaps a little embarrassed by his own father's disapproval, chased his daughter for not finishing her vegetables, the fear was amplified.
The fear was real.
Real and immediate. She ran right into a corner. Her furious father was bearing down on her, ready to spank her for being disobedient. disobedient. And in that instant of absolute panic, where physical punishment seemed totally inevitable, she found her escape route through performance.
The cut, print it story.
That's the one. She stopped, spun around, and spontaneously yelled in this dramatic Hungarian accent, "Cut! Print it! Very good, we try it again."
She performed a meta scene, basically, turning the real-life conflict into a staged drama.
And that single act of spontaneous meta-comedy saved her. It stopped the emotional and dramatic momentum stone cold. Her father literally fell over laughing. The grandfather, of course, remained disgusted, but the daughter had learned the definitive lesson of her childhood. Laughter is the best way to get out of a corner.
So it cemented this idea that performance, wit, and humor weren't just professional tools for them.
They were inherent mechanisms for conflict resolution and, crucially, for self-preservation.
And speaking of a flair for the theatrical, we have to talk about the grand moments of family drama, which earned Danny Thomas the nickname Orson.
Orson, as in Wells, yes, because he reveled in the dramatic and was prone to these highly theatrical, sometimes pompous, grandstanding moments.
And there was a specific dinner table argument with his wife, Rose Marie, that just escalated into a spectacular performance.
It did. Danny Thomas dramatically got up and stormed across the marble floor of their opulent Beverly Hills entry hall.
This is the visual detail that elevates the story to the level of high farce. He literally set the stage for his own breakdown.
He absolutely did. I mean, think of the setting. Their home was a masterpiece of opulence, a marble floor, a massive Viennese chandelier, a long, winding staircase. Danny Thomas pauses at the foot of that staircase, places his hand dramatically on the carved oak banister, turns back to the family, and bellows, "Rosemarie, I cannot live like this."
The sheer absurd cognitive dissonance of a wildly successful millionaire in a Beverly Hills mansion declaring he couldn't live there must have been too much, even for the dramatic genius himself.
It was. He immediately doubled over in laughter. It took him only a second to recognize the absurdity and the sheer theatricality of the scene he had just created.
It just confirms that these comics, even in moments of genuine anger or tension, were constantly performing.
And they possessed that critical, fast-acting reflex to recognize the inherent comedy in their own elevated lives. It's just impossible to take yourself seriously for too long when you are trained to spot a punchline absolutely anywhere.
Now let's move into the true core of their professional lives. The psychology and the really detailed craft of being a legendary comic, starting with their community and where they honed their knives. The famous Hillcrest Country Club.
The Hillcrest Country Club in Los Angeles, it was so much more than a recreational spot. It was a sanctuary and a professional breeding ground.
It was founded because of anti-Semitism.
Exactly. It was founded in the 1920s specifically because Jewish comedians and performers were systematically excluded from other major restrictive clubs like the Bel Air Country Club. So it immediately created this tight, exclusive community. The dinner table conversations there were essentially a daily, informal writers' roundtable. It was a crucial mechanism for creative survival.
And what was the atmosphere like? I mean, were they always trying to top each other with jokes? Was it competitive?
Not primarily, no. Marlo Thomas noted that while professional jokes were certainly told, many of the biggest laughs came when the comics were making fun of themselves. It was a shared vulnerability. They were attentive, they never heckled each other, and they operated with this unique camaraderie because they were all navigating the same treacherous, high-stakes trade.
And Danny Thomas, being a Lebanese Catholic, wasn't originally permitted to join Hillcrest, yet he spent so much time there he eventually became one of them.
He was made an honorary member due to his constant presence and deep integration into the community. And that's where the sources give us that classic, brilliant Groucho Marx quip.
Oh, I love this.
When the board was voting on making Danny Thomas an honorary member, Groucho, ever the razor-tongued observer, commented, "I don't mind making a non-Jew an honorary member, but couldn't we at least pick a guy who doesn't look Jewish?"
That's perfect. The joke, based on Thomas's prominent features, just encapsulated the club's whole self-deprecating humor. Speaking of razor sharpness, the cognitive speed among these comics must have been essential for survival in the high-pressure world of live clubs.
It was a prerequisite. Danny Thomas often maintained that the quickest comic of them all was Joey Bishop.
Really, quicker than anyone.
That was his opinion. And the anecdote illustrating this involves a car ride from Los Angeles to Las Vegas with Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy was speeding, going around 90 miles an hour, and inevitably, he got pulled over.
And Sammy, the big star, tries to deny the speed.
Of course. He claims he was only going around 70. When the officer dismissively points out the speed was at least 90 and demands to see his license, Joey Bishop leans his head toward the open window. And he delivers a line that instantly flips the script and challenges the officer's authority. "Officer, the man has one eye. Do you want him to look at the road or his license?"
Wow. That level of immediate deflectionary humor, which plays on a vulnerability but also creates this shared moment of relief. It shows immense cognitive speed and control. And that cognitive speed translated directly into technical advice. We have that fascinating story about Danny Thomas advising his daughter on how to handle the famously difficult Milton Berle on the set of her hit show, That Girl.
Oh, Milton Berle, despite being a family friend, was notoriously disruptive on set. He'd complain constantly it was too cold, the wait was too long, he felt unwell. The assistant director begged Marlo to intervene and calm him down.
So she calls her dad for advice.
She calls her dad, and Danny Thomas offered the most counterintuitive, almost bizarre advice you could imagine. Ask him to spell words that begin with R.
Spell words, that was his advice.
Yeah.
That makes zero sense unless you understand the deep psychological need of the comic in question. It's more of that psychological judo.
Exactly. And she tried it. She yelled out on set, "Hey, Milton, how do you spell recluse?" And Burl instantly snapped his head over, his feet pointing inward, and shot back the incorrect spelling, completely distracted from his complaining.
And she did it again.
She did. She asked him to spell remember, and he gave an even more garbled, complicated response, and the crew just burst out laughing. That was the trick. Milton didn't need quiet or attention focused on his complaints. He just wanted to feel comfortable, and he felt comfortable when people were laughing. He needed to be the center of attention and the source of the comedic energy, even if it was just by spelling words wrong.
That level of craft requires not only quick thinking, but tremendous generosity, which brings us to the importance of the straight man.
The straight man is the unsung hero, and George Burns was arguably one of the greatest ever. On That Girl, Marlo Thomas had Ted Bessel, who played her boyfriend, Donald Hollinger.
And being a good straight man, it demands perfect comic timing and, crucially, a selfless ego.
Totally selfless. The straight man has to set up the joke perfectly, but then they have this really difficult technical task of knowing when to talk into the laugh before it dies down to lead into the next joke.
Why is that timing so essential and so difficult?
Yeah. Because it's a high wire act. If the straight man talks too soon, they stomp on the star's laugh and kill the momentum. If they wait too long, the energy just collapses, and the audience has to kind of reset for the next line. You have to ride the wave of the laughter and seamlessly, almost invisibly, transition to the next setup.
And Ted Bessel was great at that.
He was excellent at being Anne-Marie's beleaguered foil, the perfect blend of patience and timing, which allowed her to shine without diminishing his own comedic strength. This role requires immense professional generosity.
This compulsion to create, to perfect, and to perform never seems to stop, even after massive success. We see this contrast beautifully captured in the working philosophies of two modern giants, Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno.
Yeah, they represent two very distinct, yet equally obsessive approaches to the craft. Jerry Seinfeld is the perfectionist artist, the ultimate craftsman. Even after achieving monumental success and wealth, he is still traveling the country, building his act story by story, joke by joke. His motivation is purely internal. It's the challenge and the love of honing the craft itself. He takes the art of being funny with a profound, almost academic seriousness.
Jay Leno, conversely, views comedy as a blue-collar trade, not a fine art.
That's the key contrast. Leno's philosophy is that comedy is a trade where, if you work hard, you can always make a living. He maintains this relentless self-discipline. He performs a minimum of 160 club dates a year, consistently testing and refreshing his material.
And the money thing is fascinating.
It is. Crucially, he lives only on the money he earns from his club dates. He banks all his massive TV earnings because he believes the system ensures he will always be hungry. For him, the hunger is the fuel.
And central to his trade philosophy is the idea that the joke itself is completely disposable.
He views a joke as a disposable product, like a tissue. You use it, it serves its purpose, you get the laugh, you get the check, and it's gone. For Leno, a comedian must constantly keep moving forward. He argues that if you sustain that aggressive forward momentum, you never have to go backward, ensuring you always have new material to sustain your trade and the financial independence it guarantees.
So they both demonstrate obsession.
Right, but one is the obsession of an artisan, Seinfeld, and the other is the obsession of a laborer, Leno.
This inherent compulsion to create and perform, even when you're already wealthy, links directly back to Conan O'Brien's profound analysis about the origins of comedy itself, specifically repression.
Yeah, O'Brien, who grew up in this large, disciplined Irish Catholic household, observed that there are many subjects, particularly things like sex or social taboos, that you just couldn't openly discuss. He argues that repression, which often gets a bad rap, actually functions like a combustion engine.
How does he mean?
The social or familial constraints create this confined space where pressure builds up and up. Comedy then becomes the tiny little spout through which all that steam shoots out.
It's the moment of anarchy escaping the politeness.
Precisely. O'Brien, who went to Harvard and wrote for The Simpsons, he understands controlled chaos. He says his show is the 1 hour where he has societal permission to be somebody else, to be anarchic and absurd, because in real life he is often chronically polite. He calls comedy the slingshot effect. You are pulled way, way back by politeness and social constraints, which heightens the tension, and then you snap forward into the joke, releasing all that stored energy.
And O'Brien applied this analysis historically, connecting that repression directly to cultures that have been politically or socially oppressed.
He did. He noted that the Irish, African Americans, and Jews are universally recognized as really funny people because humor was often the only power they possessed when they lacked systemic or political authority.
It was a weapon of the powerless.
It was. When you don't have economic power or social standing or physical strength, you mutter jokes under your breath. Humor becomes this low-power tool of resistance, of sanity, and of cultural survival, allowing them to make fun of those who hold all the power.
The desire for an independent identity is challenging for any young adult. But for a child growing up in the massive shadow of a legend like Danny Thomas, it became a fierce, defining battle. Marlo Thomas earned the nickname Miss Independence.
And that nickname was hard-won, believe me, because her father actively worked against her initial ambition. Danny Thomas was often disappointed and strongly discouraged her acting career. His perspective was rooted in his own experience as a working-class immigrant who clawed his way to success.
And he saw acting as just inherently unstable.
Exactly. His argument was based entirely on the lack of control in the profession. He argued that success in acting was too dependent on outside forces, a writer, a director, other actors, to be a reliable career path. He told her she should give it up, arguing it was a long shot that lightning would strike twice in the same family.
He was brutally blunt about it.
So blunt, he pushed her towards something with structural power, saying, "You're an educated young woman. You could be a senator, for God's sakes. Why would you pick something at which you cannot succeed?"
To hear that withdrawal of belief from a father whose unconditional love she relied on, that must have been devastating.
It was a moment of profound conflict, and her reaction was, well, explosive and legendary. She vowed in a fury that not only would she make it, but someday he and his powerful partner, Sheldon Leonard, would try to hire her and won't be able to thing afford me.
And we need to contextualize that.
Yeah.
Sheldon Leonard wasn't just some producer.
No, Sheldon Leonard was one of the most influential producers in Hollywood. He was essentially running Desilu and later CBS television at the time. Her vow wasn't just anger. It was an audacious, almost impossible declaration of war against the Hollywood establishment and her own father's power within it.
That vow became her driving mission. But that initial shadow led to some incredibly demoralizing setbacks early on.
The setbacks were deeply personal. After Danny Thomas, trying to help despite his reservations, set up a meeting with producer Mike Frankovich, a major industry figure, she walked in only to have him completely dismiss her professional aspirations.
What did he say?
He suggested she drop the business, marry her boyfriend, and simply give your father some grandkids. She was reduced entirely to a domestic role, a broodmare for the family legacy. It was totally demoralizing. She realized then she had to draw a clear line with her father. No more calls on her behalf, ever.
And then there was the physical trauma of trying to fit into the ridiculous Hollywood mold of the time.
Oh, this leads to the infamous Bonanza experience. A producer needed an Asian actress, and Marlo Thomas was desperate for work. She convinced them she could play Tai Li, a Chinese mail-order bride.
So what did she do?
She immediately scrambled to hire a waitress from a Chinese restaurant off Fong's to teach her a passable accent. And when the makeup department couldn't make her very round eyes look oval, they resorted to the ultimate Hollywood absurdity. They wrote into the script that Tai Li had a Persian mother to explain her non-Chinese features.
You can't make this stuff up. So she was a Chinese mail-order bride with a compromised accent and a Persian mother, all to force her into a role she wasn't right for.
And the physical consequences were real. Her character was a feisty revolutionary, which culminated in this spectacular but dangerous stunt where Haas, played by the nearly 300-pound Dan Blocker, angrily picked up her tiny 98-pound body and threw her into a water trough. She hit it with a sickening thud.
Wait, a nearly 300-pound man throwing a 98-pound actress into a wooden trough? That's just physically dangerous. How did she process that level of physical risk in pursuit of a deeply compromised role?
Well, she took away a bad back, for starters, and 3 indelible lessons. 1, she was not a stunt woman. 2, the lengths Hollywood would go to avoid hiring an actual ethnic actress. And 3, always politely ask the director not to kill you.
It crystallized the difficulty of breaking through when you're constantly judged against an impossible standard, both physical and familial.
Absolutely.
Her ultimate validation, that true sense of independent self, came when she deliberately sought out a place where her father's massive shadow was smaller.
She made the very strategic decision to reject the year-long national tour of the successful play Barefoot in the Park because she just couldn't face 12 months of interviews comparing her to her father.
So what was the alternative?
Instead, she chose to take the play to London, where her father wasn't nearly as well known. It was a massive gamble.
And in the opening night in London, that was the moment.
That was the moment of quiet, hard-earned triumph. The audience roared. Her parents, who had flown over, sat on their hands during the applause, terrified that if they started clapping, the audience would stop and realize the famous Danny Thomas was there. The fear of hijacking her moment was palpable.
And the excitement in the dressing room that night, her father showed not pride or joy, but utter relief.
Utter relief. He looked exhausted, finally knowing she was going to be okay on her own terms. The ultimate confirmation, however, came the next day in the review that cemented her liberation. It ended with the single, glorious, separating line. She's the daughter of an American comedian, I'm told.
I'm told. The father's legacy, after years of being a crushing weight, was reduced to a passing, almost irrelevant footnote. The separation was complete, and her talent stood on its own merit.
He was everything she fought for.
With her independent career launched and validated, Marlo Thomas turned that fierce, obsessive energy towards social change, proving that laughter could be a powerful engine for feminism, starting with her personal awakening.
Her primary motivation was deeply personal and born out of observation. She had witnessed 16 marriages in her family, aunts, cousins, friends, and in every single one, the husband was numero uno.
The one whose career, opinions, and needs dominated.
Completely dominated. The wives, she noted, suffered the everyday drip of dissolving self-esteem because they had no independent economic or professional standing.
She saw the cost of dependence firsthand and determined she would never be in that position.
It galvanized her. She realized she needed to always have a place to go, a solid foundation, so no one could ever use that threatening question about her. Where's she going to go? Reading Betty Friedan's seminal work, The Feminine Mystique, provided the intellectual validation for that feeling.
It confirmed that her personal experience was part of a larger systemic frustration felt by countless women.
It did. And that awakening led directly to the genesis of That Girl, a revolutionary concept hidden inside a sitcom wrapper. When network executives approached her about a show idea, the concepts all positioned her as a supporting player. The wife of a doctor, the secretary of a lawyer, or the daughter of someone else. She pushed back, asking, "Did you ever think about doing a show where the girl is the someone?"
That's a great question.
She challenged the network to create a show about an educated young woman who didn't necessarily want to get married immediately, but who had a dream of her own career in New York.
And remarkably, one executive, Edgar Sherrick, actually agreed.
He did. He took the challenge seriously, read The Feminine Mystique, and though everyone thought he was crazy for backing a show that didn't guarantee a wedding by the final episode, he agreed. That Girl subtly but firmly challenged the domestic status quo, proving a woman could prioritize her career and independence over finding a husband.
The next great social project, Free to Be, You and Me, took that feminist momentum and aimed it straight at children. What was the specific catalyst for that groundbreaking album and book?
It started when she was reading to her young niece, Diane, and was genuinely shocked by the blatant limiting sexism in traditional children's literature.
What kind of things was she seeing?
She found books with captions that read like restrictive decrees, Boys are pilots, girls are stewardesses. Boys invent things, girls use what boys invent. And my personal favorite, boys can eat, girls can cook. She realized these toxic, limiting ideas were ingrained so early, teaching children to live inside these little gender boxes.
So the mission was to counteract this insidious ideology, not with dry educational material, but with the most powerful tool she knew: laughter.
Exactly. The project's ethos was built on the old adage, what is learned with laughter is learned well. She and co-producer Carol Hart hired A-list showbiz talent writers and musicians, not typical kids educators like Shel Silverstein, Mel Brooks, and Harry Belafonte, to make fun of those old ideas.
And the material they created was so far ahead of its time, it challenged these really deep-seated norms about gender roles.
The examples are fantastic and intentionally provocative. Herb Gardner suggested a story showing it wasn't unmanly for a boy to cry, which led to Carol Hall's song, It's All Right to Cry. They got football player Rosie Grier to sing it, using his hypermasculine image to validate the tenderness.
And the princess story.
Yes, and Marlo Thomas wanted a princess who was active, decisive, and crucially not blonde, leading to the modernized myth of Atalanta, where the brunette princess joins the race so she can decide for herself whether to marry. The liberating final line of that story was that whether or not they married, they will live happily ever after.
The project was a massive hit as an album and a book, but translating it to an ABC TV special was where the network panic truly erupted.
Oh, ABC executives were, to put it mildly, terrified of the messages. They desperately tried to censor core pieces of the show. They begged the team to remove William Wants a Doll, which was about telling little boys it's okay to cuddle a doll. They genuinely considered the concept dangerously corrupting to traditional gender norms.
And the racial implications of one particular scene caused an even bigger furor in the network boardroom.
It really did. The scene featured Harry Belafonte and the host, dressed identically, pushing baby buggies and singing Carol Hall's Parents Are People, a celebration of the idea that parents can pursue any career they choose.
What was the problem with that?
Network executives panicked because they feared the scene insinuated that Harry Belafonte and the host were married, which, in a primetime children's special in 1974, was seen as too threatening and controversial for the national audience.
The audacity of the network to be more concerned about the insinuation of an interracial couple working than the actual message of gender equality is just incredible.
It highlights the extreme social boundaries they were intentionally pushing against. They fought hard, even threatening to take the special to CBS, and eventually all the controversial material stayed in.
And the success was undeniable.
Completely. It won both an Emmy and a Peabody, and the accompanying book became a New York Times bestseller, proving that audiences were hungry for these concepts delivered with laughter.
And the lasting legacy of her work in feminism is best summarized by a quote from one of her colleagues in the movement.
After Free to Be, she went on to found the INS Foundation for Women with Gloria Steinem, Letty Pogrebin, and Pat Carbin. And she recalled Bella Abzug's famous quip, which perfectly defines the true measure of equality. Bella said, "True equality will come not when a female Einstein is recognized as quickly as a male Einstein, but when a female Schlemiel is promoted as quickly as a male Schlemiel."
That is a fascinating concept. Why does the promotion of a female Schlemiel, a foolish, clumsy person, signify true equality?
Because it proves that competence is no longer a prerequisite for overcoming gender bias. When women have to be exceptional, Einsteins, just to be noticed, but average men, Schlemiels, are promoted simply because they are men, the system is biased. True equality means that an average, even foolish woman can fail, succeed, and be promoted based on the same standard of mediocrity that average men enjoy. It's the ultimate benchmark of systemic fairness.
We've explored how laughter was used as a defense, a survival tool, and an engine for social change. It seems perfectly fitting that when the inevitable came, grief laughter was also the mechanism that helped the family cope.
Danny Thomas died suddenly of heart failure on February 6, 1991. He was 79. Marlo Thomas recalled the doctor's call at 1:30 in the morning, and her immediate primal reaction, dropping the phone and just rocking back and forth uncontrollably. That initial wave of grief was profound and physically jarring.
The flight to Los Angeles must have been excruciating, surrounded by strangers while dealing with such a public loss.
It was almost unbearable. But then an unexpected comfort appeared. Other passengers, recognizing her in the situation, started passing cocktail napkins over her shoulder with handwritten notes. "I loved your father. He was like a father to me," and simple condolences. These were her first condolence notes, and the public's love for him, demonstrated by strangers on a plane, offered a moment of unexpected catharsis.
The family essentially turned the funeral into Danny Thomas's last show, trying to manage the public and private grief simultaneously.
They realized they were producing Dad's last show, and it was a star-studded event. There were speeches from former presidents Reagan and Ford, the Archbishop came, and comedy legends like Bob Hope and Milton Berle spoke. Milton Berle, ever the comic, started his eulogy with a perfect, immediate, tension-breaking line, yelling into the microphone. "Thanks, Geraldo."
Duckles. Of course he did. But the truly cathartic moment, the hysterical release, came from the audience of the family pew.
It was a beautiful, necessary moment of absurdity. Marlo Thomas described being in this terrible state of grief when her mother's bright red lipstick fell out of her purse, hit the marble floor with a noisy clack, and then just began rolling across the aisle, passing the grandchildren.
And what happened?
They all started giggling, and the family erupted in this massive fit of hysterical laughter. They couldn't stop. The tears were streaming down their faces. Their bottoms were shaking. The absurdity of that tiny, vibrant red object rolling across the floor in the middle of all that formal grief just shattered the paralysis of sadness.
And the greatest comfort came from an immediate, sharp, comedic punch delivered by a fellow legend.
Days later, when friends were visiting the widow, Rose Marie, the legendary George Burns, walked in. Marlo Thomas recalled how Burns barely acknowledged anyone else, walked straight up to her mother, and with that famous twinkle in his eye, delivered the perfect, brilliant line for the moment. "Hey, Rosie, I hear you're single again."
That's incredible.
That is gutsy, smart comedy that only a true craftsman knows how to deploy, using humor to break through the paralyzing sadness and give the widow permission to re-enter life.
And if we look at the other enduring legacy of Danny Thomas, separate from his jokes, we have to talk about St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.
His passion for St. Jude was unbelievable, especially when you consider the source. His belief that he could build a world-renowned cancer research hospital was just astounding, especially for a poor kid from Toledo with 1 year of high school who was primarily a nightclub comedian.
And his drive came from what he saw as a kid.
Exactly. It was galvanized by the sheer inequity of poor healthcare he witnessed in childhood. He saw children he knew dying from things like influenza and rodent bites because no one in his poor immigrant neighborhood ever went to a doctor.
And the hospital's name came from a deeply personal promise made when his career was at its lowest point.
Yes. During a period when his performing career had stalled completely, he prayed to St. Jude Thaddeus, the patron saint of hopeless causes, promising to build a shrine in his name if he found success. He found fame, and he kept his promise, building the hospital in Memphis, Tennessee.
And it was revolutionary for its time.
It was, founded on the principle that it would treat children regardless of race, religion, or ability to pay, which was a radical concept in the American South in the 1960s. This links his charity work directly back to his core ethos of fighting for the marginalized.
And that commitment endured even after his death, demonstrating the depth of camaraderie in that generation of comics.
It really did. Just a few months after she died, there was a major St. Jude benefit. Bob Hope, who was a legend in his own right, flew from Los Angeles all the way to New York to MC the event without even being asked.
He wasn't even on the bill.
No. Danny Thomas had always personally called his friends to ask for their help, but Bob Hope just showed up because, as he simply put it, "I love Danny." It demonstrated that professional friendship and loyalty were just as enduring as the laughs they manufactured.
This has been an incredibly deep dive into the dual nature of the comic's life. A brutal, obsessive profession defined by high-stakes performance that also functions as the greatest survival tool for dealing with life's hardest truths, from parental tension to social oppression, and eventually grief itself.
Yeah, we've seen that the constant need for external validation from the crowd, the family, and colleagues, it really defines these legends.
Ultimately, laughter is both the highest form of professional accomplishment and the best way to get out of a corner.
And we've seen the sheer volume of material needed to sustain a career like Leno's, and the extreme pressure of perfection required for a cracksman like Seinfeld. The psychology shows that these comics often found their confidence and their escape in that moment of spontaneous, quick-witted destruction.
But here's the final provocative thought I want to leave you with, and it connects back to one of the deepest insights about the craft itself. We discussed the legendary George Burns getting such a massive laugh at the Hillcrest Club that he decided the joke was too good for him to claim.
Right.
He strategically attributed it to his friend, Georgie Jessel, so he could retell it everywhere without sounding like he was bragging or resting on old material.
It raises a profound question about that intense, constant pressure to deliver new material and maintain professional dominance, even for the greatest figures. If the need for acceptance and the pressure to be funny are so pervasive, and the cost of appearing too self-satisfied is so high, that the great George Burns felt compelled to disguise the origin of his own best material just to ensure a successful performance.
Do the performers need the laugh more than the audience does?
Yeah.
Something to chew on until next time.